Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Food Coma Conversations Over Meals in America, sponsored by Key Spot, connecting communities. I am your host, Cynthia, and just to give you a little background for those who are new to the podcast, the reason why I wanted to do this podcast was to help celebrate diversity and showcase the wonderful ways we are different and still all alike. And this episode is special because we have a professional in the area of diversity here with us, I'll say Dr. Monique. So she's here talking about her experience as a diversity coach and diversity professional. So we're going to have some really good conversation with her today. But before we begin with that, of course, as usual, we're going to start with the food. So, Dr. Monique, I know you brought something very delicious for the podcast today. It looks like lasagna was on the menu for you.
Yes.
So let's hear a little bit more about your lasagna and what inspired you to bring this.
My family likes my lasagna. I started making it years ago, and my kids are very plain eaters, so they don't like a lot of stuff in it, but it's just become one of the meals that they enjoy, and I enjoy making it for them. So it's just kind of like a family staple. There's no special recipe or special ingredients.
But it's special because I'm eating it and it's delicious.
Well, I appreciate that.
So this is very good, very tasty. So the meat that you're using, is it hamburger meat or what is your special?
It's just ground chuck. It's just comfort food. And ricotta cheese, mozzarella, mild cheddar cheese.
Typically, how long does it take you to make this type of lasagna?
It takes about 40 minutes because I use the oven-ready lasagna noodles.
Ah.
You know, there was a time when you boiled the noodles, and you still can do that.
Right.
But then I got hip to the oven-ready noodles, so you don't have to boil them prior to cooking and putting them in the oven. You just put the noodles in the oven, and they're sort of, hard.
Okay.
And they cook and bake in the oven as the lasagna is warming up.
Wow, that's a good secret. I didn't know anything about that. This is really good. I'm killing it. So the other item that we also have on our plate is meatloaf. And I know a lot of people are familiar with making meatloaf. As Dr. Monique mentioned, this is another comfort food. With my recipe, I combined lean ground chuck, I believe, with ground beef. So it has a combination, so it's not dry, it's just right. And then I also put in a few extra spices. And for my sauce, I combined barbecue sauce and ketchup. So when you mix that together, it's a good combination for the topping. So I like it. What do you think?
I think it's great. It reminds me of my meatloaf. One of the few things that the other things that I make, I don't have a big repertoire of things, but I do like it. It's very
You have
good.
some go-tos, though.
I have some go-tos, absolutely.
That's all that matters.
I'm not overly creative, but I do have some go-tos.
Yeah.
And they say as long as your family likes it,
that's all that matters.
That's what matters.
Now, what is your recipe for your meatloaf?
I actually add different spices, kind of like you. I use barbecue sauce, but I don't think I add the ketchup. That's a good idea.
Okay. Yeah.
But I do add breadcrumbs.
Okay.
Italian breadcrumbs. Just onions and things like that. Or if I don't have onions, onion powder. But nothing overly fancy.
Yep. So this is quite tasty.
I do add egg to it.
Yes, we did the egg. Green peppers, red peppers, onions. Those are some of the ingredients that's in here too.
That's good.
So Dr. Monique, let's talk about you a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about, where did you grow up? Let's start there.
So, I grew up in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is 45 minutes north of Boston.
Okay.
And my parents were living and born and raised in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way they ended up in Massachusetts was they grew up during the Jim Crow era.
Oh.
And so in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad had a cousin who moved to Massachusetts. Her husband was in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was recruiting family members to come up there. I guess she was a little lonely, and so my dad came and got settled,
Oh, that was
and then
great.
got a job, and then my mom came, and all four of us were born in Massachusetts. So that's kind of how that happened. You know, a lot of blacks were migrating to the north, you know, for better opportunity.
That is very true because my family, like my mom's side, they came from Arkansas
Okay.
to come up north. So yeah, that was a time period where a lot of minority African Americans did move up to the north for other opportunities because of what was happening in the South.
Exactly.
So even though you were born in Massachusetts, you probably visited the South. And what kind of experiences did you see there?
Well, we spent most of our summers in Alabama, and it was very segregated, meaning that, you know, the blacks sort of lived on one side of town, and whites lived on another side of town, but just very close-knit family. So that was nice that we got to actually know our relatives,
Right.
despite the fact that we lived so far away. So that was a good thing. But mostly that, you know, we just sort of traveled in, you know, small circles among family, but I did notice at a very young age the segregation, you know, that was still existing. And it was a small town, you know, so.
So it's almost like you lived in two worlds, right? So when you went in the South, you experienced that segregation. It was after Jim Crow, right? Okay, so you experienced
70s,
that.
70s.
But then when you went back to Massachusetts, what was it like there as far as your relationships with other people and other people from different backgrounds? What was that like?
Well, I think at a very young age we were very aware of the fact that there was very little racial diversity because we grew up in a town, like I was almost always the only black girl in my class.
Okay.
So, and that went on all the way through to high school. In a class of almost 400 students, I was one of two black girls that graduated from the high school in my class.
Okay.
So I was very aware of being different. I did well academically, so people tended to know me more so, and I was captain of the cheerleading team.
But you were known as a smart girl.
A smart girl, and then, you know, I was captain of the cheerleading team, and so people sort of knew me. But overall, I would say our upbringing was good. We had friends from a lot of different backgrounds, a variety of different racial and ethnic backgrounds.
Right.
But there were some challenges, and there was always that realization that we were sort of in the minority growing up. And there was a small group of us who sort of stuck together, and we were more like, you know, brothers and sisters.
Like a support system.
Right,
Okay.
right. Other students, but, you know, they weren't in my grade. So, but there was a group of us, and we still stay in touch for the most part today. But there weren't a lot of African Americans at that time, you know, in school.
What about other minorities besides African Americans at the school? Were there any other minorities there?
I remember being very aware of having Greek and Armenian friends and our Italian friends. But in terms of other minorities, the only actual relationships and friendships that I recall and that stand out are Spanish-speaking Puerto Rican individuals.
Okay.
So I had a really close friend who was Puerto Rican. My brother was friends with her brother. So that's what I remember mostly.
So now let's fast forward. Today, you are a professional in the area of diversity and coaching in diversity. So what made you decide to go in that direction in your life?
I think it's a combination of both my personal experience as well as academic experience. I started out pursuing a master's degree in counseling, counselor education, and the focus was college student personnel. So there's a heavy diversity focus in that coursework.
Okay.
And so that was part of, the introduction from an academic standpoint, where I was learning about, identity development models.
Right.
White identity development models. They have identity development models for every
Wow.
ethnicity. There's one for Asian. There's Black identity development models.
Wow, this is like, okay, I didn't I didn't know. And what class was this where you were learning these things?
I don't remember the specific class, but it was a diversity related class. I forget the exact title, but you learn about the different stages of identity development. And so, like with the Black identity development model, at some point there's a stage called the immersion stage. And I actually, when I reflect, I think that I went through that stage, which is, you'd have an experience or an encounter that might be race related, and it makes you sort of regress into your own culture more. And so you hear about people, going away to college, and then they become very passionate about being Black, and that whole experience. So they're kind of immersing themselves in their culture, and so often we didn't learn about Marcus Garvey,
right?
And the whole Back to Africa movement, and so many other people who were very influential throughout history. So those the courses really helped to influence me, as well as just growing up, in an environment where I felt isolated at times.
Right.
So, what better way than to use my influence to
help
make a difference.
Yeah.
To try to make a difference.
And to bring people together, maybe share your knowledge to help people overcome their biases. Speaking of biases, I know one of the areas that you train in is unconscious bias. So what is that exactly?
Unconscious bias is attitudes, stereotypes, thoughts, behaviors that impact decisions that we make or impact our behavior in an unconscious way.
Okay.
We're not really conscious of these things when they're occurring, in these thoughts and all of that.
Right.
So that's really what unconscious bias is. And for me, the way I see unconscious bias as being a problem is when you start making decisions about other people's life or impacting them in some way where, they don't get a job, or in the educational system, maybe you don't realize it, but you're discouraging them. You're telling them that, well, you know what, you might not want to consider being a surgeon because, I just don't see that as fitting for you.
And is that based off of people's own personal thoughts and ideas of how others are? Okay.
So we're all a product of our environment. And
Right.
so we have these patterns. We human beings are wired in such a way where we look for categories and we look for patterns, and that's kind of what we do. We put people into categories.
We have to group them.
Yeah, so we look for these patterns. If you do this, then you must be like this. Or so that's kind of what's occurring, is that we're looking for these shortcuts in a way, where we're making these very quick decisions. We're thinking very, very quickly, and so we make these quick decisions. I'm going to cross the street because I see him coming. I'm going to go over here to this. So we're making these very, very quick decisions based on these patterns, based on these thoughts, these categories that we are trying to make sense of.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of what unconscious bias is. But when you start impacting people's lives where, you're shooting someone because you thought that they look like the
the bad guy, and then they're
bad
actually
guy.
the person who's helping.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
Right. So let's think about it. You've had a wealth of experience growing up where you've gotten a chance to see what it was like, segregation versus, being amongst others who are in, different backgrounds, and in some cases being the only minority. So you've gotten a wide experience in that way. For those people who are around only their culture, what would be a good way to help engage people who are only used to seeing others who are like them and only used to seeing those who are not like them from the lens of the television or from the lens of the internet, where it doesn't really represent? So what are some ways we can help bring people together in that way, those who are isolated from others from different cultures? And this could be people, whether they are, rural areas, or whether they're in the inner city and never stepped out of their own neighborhoods. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think they have to be willing. That's part of the equation, in my opinion. They have to be open and willing to take those steps, because you can't force anyone to do anything, right? And so
and nobody's born a racist,
right? Exactly.
Nobody's born with this bias of I don't like you, because typically kids are like, I want to play.
Right.
So who are you? You're a kid, I want to play.
Right. But parents or whomever has to be open and willing to kind of take the necessary steps. But there's so many different ways that we can expose ourselves to if we are willing and curious, because I do think people have a natural curiosity about people. That's why we travel and go visit other places and things.
And
that's
a great way to expose yourself to people of other cultures, different backgrounds.
Absolutely.
I mean, in America, I keep saying this, we are a wealthy country when it comes to not just financially, but when it comes to people. We are exposed to so many different backgrounds, foods, cultures. I mean, the clothing, everything you see is inspired from people all over. And we should be cherishing that and, embracing it rather than not.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, we are very wealthy in that way.
And, when I taught a social and cultural issues course, which is basically a diversity course, one of their assignments was that they had to do, I think, 2 or 3 otherness experiences is what I called them.
Oh, otherness, is that what you said?
I call them otherness experiences, where they had to go and expose themselves to a different environment and a different group of people, which was something other than what they were. So, you can go to if you're not Jewish, you can go to a Jewish synagogue. If you're welcome to come into their service. You can go to a Native American festival. These are all things that I've done, actually.
Oh, that's awesome. Those are great ideas.
You can go to, we have a beautiful Islamic center here right off the 75, and they are very welcoming and inviting, and they would have done presentations for school districts, and the facility there is just amazing and beautiful.
I bet people pass it all the time and don't give it a second thought.
It's beautiful. So educational, opportunities where you attend events, you go to, we have a beautiful National Underground Railroad Freedom Center downtown.
Right.
And
Oprah helped with that one. Helped with funding and raising money. Yeah.
So there's so many different ways. Having a conversation with someone who's different that you may see regularly, but you never take the time to actually ask them, hey, how are you doing? Or, tell me a little bit about yourself. I see you all the time.
Yeah.
I actually, when I first started my teaching career, fresh out of my doctoral program, a young lady said to me, it was a graduate level course, you're the first Black person I've ever come into contact with. She had never had any contact with anyone who was Black. I use Black and African American interchangeably, but she had never had any contact with anyone who was Black.
And I believe it. Yeah.
And she said to me, and you're really cool, and you're okay. So some people might be offended by that. I wasn't. I was happy to be that for her.
Yeah.
And
so awesome.
So you just never know. So there's so many different ways that you can read even, but there's nothing like one-on-one interaction.
Yeah. I was just sharing in the earlier podcast how the same experience happened to me. Just being out and being in an environment where I might be one of the very few minorities, if not the only one, that in some cases gives exposure to people who may not necessarily be around anyone who's African American. I've had people say to me, it's the first time I've talked to somebody who's African American. And I don't get offended. I'm just, having dialogue and, trying to hopefully change any biases that could be negative
Mm-hmm.
with those people who've never met someone who may be of that different background.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good point. Just put yourself out there and
Mm-hmm.
embrace being curious
Mm-hmm.
and learning about other people and other cultures. It's a great thing. You know,
Absolutely.
you can learn so much from people, and then especially in the business community,
Right.
I know that's a common thing where businesses are trying to find people of different backgrounds because you have all kinds of ideas that come out from the industries
Absolutely.
of people who have different experiences, not
Right.
just the same type of experience.
Right. We live in a global world, and
Exactly.
so we want to prepare our young people to be able to function in a global world, which means that they're going to encounter people
Right.
from different races and different ethnicities.
Yeah.
So,
So when we look at, let's say, the United States as a whole, I kind of see a pattern where when we look at the suburbs versus the inner city versus the rural areas, where a lot of people of different backgrounds are coming to the suburbs, and that is an opportunity where they are intermixing. They are neighbors. I know for me, I have neighbors of different backgrounds that are just in my area, so that's a common thing. But what about the people who are away, who are not facing the intermixing of cultures? So we talked about they have to be willing, but maybe are there any programs out there where people have opportunities to try to connect? Or what are some other ideas that we have where we can either have a program in place, or are there programs already out there that work towards giving people from the inner city opportunities to meet with people from maybe the rural areas, and they come together and just have discussions or get to know each other?
well, I think it's all about being innovative and creative, and so, you know, I think those things are happening, and on some level, I know like one of the churches, you know, Crossroads Church has the, I forget what they call it, but they have these community conversations, and they have these different groups related to race, and it's open to any and everyone.
Wow, so
And
the
so-
churches are doing
Yes,
something.
and churches are doing something.
I just
so-
wonder how many people know about that. But that's
Right,
great that
right.
we know about it now, so
Yes.
we can share with others. So
I-
Crossroads Church.
Crossroads
okay.
Church, I forget the name of their program, but I'm
Right.
sure if you go on
Locally
their website.
in Cincinnati.
Right, but they have these groups that
Yeah.
meet, and you know, they basically are having courageous conversations about race. I actually inquired about being a like a group leader, a facilitator, but I had a conflict, so I couldn't do the training. And they provide training
Right.
for people who, you know, you complete your application online, or you know, fill out a form online expressing your interest if you're interested in leading, or even being a part, I think, as well. So anyway, churches, I think, are doing a great job of that.
Okay.
I also think approaching schools is a good way to
Okay.
create or, you know, invite them to participate in something, some type of program. You know, I just finished yesterday I was with Northwest School District, and they had their first meeting of their Multicultural Student Leadership Council.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I've been a diversity consultant with them for a couple of years now, and so one of the initiatives that came out of, you know, the strategic plan was to get students more involved in some diversity initiatives, and so it's basically a leadership program for students.
Wonderful.
And so they were recommended by principals, and there was a brief application that they had to fill out.
Right.
Why is diversity important to you?
Yeah.
And all of that. So in any event, they'll meet 4 times a year for half a day.
Right.
So yesterday was like a little mini conference for them.
So are you there to be there with them during the times they meet, or is there a
Yes,
teacher?
I am there, but
so you're like the facilitator. Or?
So I'm a consultant, so I work alongside of one of the assistant directors. For her title has recently changed to include diversity and inclusion.
Oh, wonderful.
So she is their diversity person, and so I am part of her team. So I'm her go-to in terms of, you know, consulting with her on different things and helping her to create different programming.
That's awesome.
But she's the brains and the worker actually behind the operation, but I do assist in whatever she needs help with, and from a creative standpoint, I help in that regard as well. But I'm present at all of those events and activities as well.
So what do you think about any and every school having some type of diversity program in place? Do you think it's beneficial for that to be something that's part of every school?
Absolutely, because I believe that diversity benefits everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So even if your school does not have a lot of racial and ethnic diversity,
Right.
and everyone looks the same, I still believe they could benefit from.
Because they'll eventually go
Diversity.
out to the real
Exactly.
world,
The global
and people
world.
will see,
Exactly.
oh, there's someone who doesn't look like me.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
It's not a deficit.
Right.
It's it's a benefit,
Mm-hmm.
and I think just having exposure to differences and to
Mm-hmm.
different people
Yeah.
and different ways of thinking and different ways of doing things, I think is helpful.
Right.
And it prepares them for the real world.
Right. Yeah. So, what do you think about when people have stigmas or people have stereotypes? How can we fight those that take place in? It's common. I mean, you see stereotypes all the time. How do we combat the idea of the stereotypes?
Well, I think all the things that we've been talking about,
Mm-hmm.
uh, just through education,
Mhm.
through interaction,
Interaction
through
and
engagement,
education. Yeah.
through events, through
Mhm.
attending conferences,
Mhm.
through networking,
Mm-hmm.
just by engaging with different people. Then
So-
you begin to see that
Yeah.
what you thought is
Yeah.
not actually the case.
Or what somebody taught you.
Or what somebody taught
it's
you.
not true.
It's not true.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So I really, and the willingness to kind of broaden your
Yeah.
perspective, that's important as well. Because there's some people who, hold on to things.
Right.
And there's a quote that says, those who can't change their mind can't change anything.
Yeah. Now, why? I know I'm asking some questions that you might not have answers to, but why is it that there are so many people that want to hold on to the past, hold on to traditions of separation or traditions that are not inclusive?
I think because
Is it fear, maybe?
there's a fear, and also it's a perceived threat
Okay.
to some degree.
Right.
We hear a lot of talk about the demographics changing, and by a certain year it'll be mostly people of color, and
Mhm.
that if you've been in the majority and you have that's been your experience, that could be somewhat threatening, and you feel like you're going to be left out somehow, or
Yeah, I think that's where we need to educate, because shifting demographics doesn't mean you're going to be put down or whatever the fear is.
Mhm.
That's where we need to have some conversations,
Mhm.
because we see more and more on the news discussion about divisiveness, and it's like we need to get to a place where we can embrace
Mhm.
and not divide,
Mhm.
bring people together and not separate them.
Exactly.
So,
And one of my pet peeves is the word tolerate.
tolerate. Ooh, okay.
And there's actually a website. I forget the website, but nonetheless, it's a fabulous website
Mhm.
for educators. And I've been on it, and they have some great resources. But I just wish they would change the name, because in my mind,
Mhm.
the way I liken the word tolerance is to, I don't really like you, but since you're here and you're around,
I
guess
gotta deal with you.
I gotta deal with you. And the reality is, we're not all going to love each other. I
Right.
get that, but there's just something about that's just
Right.
not attractive to me.
Right.
It's not very endearing to have someone say, well, tolerance is never the end goal to me,
Right.
in my mind.
When I think about people who are not embracing of others who have different backgrounds and just have this mindset of, oh, I don't like you because you're black, or because you're Mexican, or because you're whatever. It's just like, what is it about that person that has you so fearful that you can't embrace talking to somebody who's
Mhm.
different from you?
Mm-hmm.
And those are the barriers that we need to kind of work through and get past,
Mhm.
and break down,
Mm-hmm.
because you're an educated person, very smart, you experience so much, accomplished,
Well, thank you.
and for someone to put a stereotype on you, just looking at you and say, oh, you're African American, therefore you come from a broken home, or whatever the stereotype might be, those kind of things we need to get that out of our mindset anymore, because we should not take people at what you think they are. Find out who the person really is.
And it's going to take time. It takes time for that. One of the speakers yesterday for the Multicultural Student Leadership Council was a gentleman from the Underground Railroad Freedom Center.
Right.
And he gave the students a historical perspective of slavery and how things happened over time.
Right.
And that there's this notion of separatism and all of that. And so the students weren't really aware that that he talked about how gun laws back in the 1700s, where other people could have guns, but African American or black men at the time were not allowed to have guns and different things of that nature. So it was just really enlightening for them, And one of the students, I forget what he shared, but one of the students said, "They never told us about that. They didn't tell us about that at Jamestown."
Oh yeah.
We learned about Jamestown, but they didn't tell us about that.
Yeah.
Because he's a public historian. So that's one of the things that he does, is that he helps students to understand, the history behind things, that we didn't just form historically black colleges because we wanted to be separate. We were not welcome at the other institutions, and then also it enabled us to educate African American students in the way that we believe they should be educated.
And prepare them for going out into the world, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
With some of the different schools. Wow. So understanding history, it sounds like that's something that's really important. Really important for people to know what has taken place in order to not repeat it.
Right.
And to understand, well, where we are today. History, has it changed the way the schools have taught people about history, and whether it is history from slavery, African Americans, or minorities, or whatever? Has it changed in any way?
Well, I can't say with certainty because I have not been a teacher in high schools. I do know that they have, established curriculums, and there's some parameters and boundaries around what they can include. I have been impressed with some of the courses that my daughter had in terms of the books that she read, and on different races, ethnicities, and things of that nature. That's a hard question. I do think that there's not a heavy focus on the different races and different ethnicities. I do think that they touch on it, but I don't know, at what length, I know for me, when I went to college, it was like eye-opening, because I was like, you mean I could take a course in the Black Studies department on African American female writers? So it was just like a whole eye-opening experience, because you have very focused courses, and there's more academic freedom in a university setting than in a high school setting. And then I do know that in some places, if there's too much of an emphasis on diverse readings and books and things of that nature, there have been parents who have complained and haven't appreciated it. There are other parents who do appreciate it, from black parents, white parents, who want their children to have that kind of exposure.
So, I'm going to be a devil's advocate here. So some people might say, oh, don't teach so much history about the past because we don't want to worry about what happened then. We just want to focus on the future. What is the value of understanding the history?
Well, I can only speak for myself, but I believe that when you understand the value of the history, it gives you more of a sense of identity, of where you come from, where your ancestors come from, the struggles that they went through, from
the impact that they made,
from the right to vote, from slavery ending and trying to establish themselves, academically and in businesses, and just wanting to live the dream and be here, be good citizens here in America. It just helps to give you a sense of pride, I believe. When you know your history, also, you can't just wipe it out,
Right, because especially here in America, people are still living out what has happened throughout the course of history.
Exactly.
We still see it. when we talked earlier about inner cities and people who have not gotten out of those areas to fulfill educational aspirations, we still see the impact in those places and other places as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not just let's forget everything. I think it is important that we do understand, but also we take measures to help lift people up and lift each other up. Bring people together, lift each other up. So let's talk a little bit more about your experiences in the area of diversity coaching, diversity professional. So what are some of the unique experiences you've had, or eye-opening experiences that you have had in that area, in that field?
So one thing that comes to mind, and I think I just experienced it not long ago, is that I feel like sometimes, I do diversity trainings for a variety of different groups. So I've done them for educators, attorneys, students, faculty, so a variety of different populations. And so I feel like sometimes when people have a hard time receiving the information, or it makes them feel emotional in some way, they may take shots at the presenter, at me.
Yeah. Put their frustrations out on you. It's your fault.
Right. Or, say things that are that don't make any sense, or to me that just are just uncalled for. So for me, I've just learned that it comes with the territory. And I am a very sensitive person, but I don't get very sensitive over that.
That's good.
I process it, I think about it, I evaluate it, and then, I let it go. Because one of the things that I say often is that I am not there to convince anyone.
Right.
I will share what I know in the best way that I know. Am I perfect? No. Do I say all the right things all the time? No. But I'm very conscious of the words that I use, and I believe that that's part of my, purpose and my mission. And so I'm not there to convince you or to debate with you. So either you already have some idea or belief that diversity is important, or if not, then thank you for coming. And but that's not my role to try to convince you. However, if you want to have a side conversation with me where we can talk more in depth, I would be happy to do that. I will do that. But I'm not going to go back and forth and debate, but I will give it, all I've got in terms of what I know and helping people to see things. So that's really my goal, is to change people's mindset for the better.
Yes.
To open their thinking, to unlock possibilities in terms of the way that they think about things.
Oh, that's perfect, because our motto here is opening hearts and changing minds one day at a time. That's what we want to do with Food Coma, is help people embrace diversity, bringing people together, not have unconscious bias or even explicit bias where they're thinking negative of someone just because of the way they look. So that's important. Do you have any experiences where you had someone come in totally one way, thinking, okay, I'm not going to embrace, but then they have a shift when it comes to, oh, well, maybe it's not what I thought. Have you had any experiences like that where you could actually see somebody go through their transformation?
Maybe students, but no particular student comes out. I can't think of anyone specifically, but in general, I've seen that with students where you can see it in their writing, because you write a lot in my field, do a lot of papers and things of that nature. So I've seen that probably more with students as they learn more and get exposure to more, and then also your classmates, and even in some diversity trainings, I've not really had to say much, because sometimes other people who are present say, well, hey, I don't really agree with that, or here's something that you're probably not thinking about. So sometimes you don't really have to say a whole lot, because the people around them will say, well, you should consider this or think about it in this way. So
that's a good point. In today's day, it's hard to talk about touchy subjects, and when it comes to race relationships, that is a touchy subject. So this forum might be one of the few where people have the opportunity to really share how they feel or share their experience. So that's something that also that's valuable as far as what you do. You allow people to share what they're feeling with others in a safe environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And usually at the beginning of the trainings, I talk about that. That
Mhm.
you know, there's no judgment here.
Right.
There are no repercussions here.
Mhm.
You know, I don't have any authority to fire you, or you know anything like that. So. I try to create the environment, but you know there are people who are reluctant to say, express their thoughts because they don't want to be viewed negatively or what have you. But
Right.
at least they were there, they were present, and they heard the information. But you know, really with diversity initiatives, it needs to be ongoing. The one and done presentation where you come in for 2 hours and that's it, and then everybody, you know, leaves and they go on to back to their normal life. It's not as effective, at least not in a workplace or even in an educational environment. It needs to be infused and become a natural part of what they do.
Yeah. How do you make it stick? That's the question. I could see with maybe students, especially when they go off to college and they are experienced with seeing people from different environments and in that environment constantly. I can see that. But how do you make it stick when it comes to like companies, especially where there's not, maybe there's not that many minorities in the company? How do you make it stick when you come in and you do your courses? What instruction do you give to help people keep that momentum when it comes to?
The first thing is before I come in, it needs to come from leadership. So the leadership of the organization needs to be supportive of diversity and inclusion initiatives and needs to move it along. They need to be the supporters, the pushers, so to speak,
the leaders,
and the leaders of diversity and inclusion.
Right.
And so if they lead, then it's kind of like the trickle down effect.
Right.
You know, so, and then it becomes an integral part of everything that they do. So then some companies have the ERGs, employee resource groups.
Right.
Where, you know, they have different groups for different populations, whether it's women or African Americans or what have you, and they invite them, anyone, to be a part of them.
Right.
But they have these different groups.
And those are important, right?
They're very
when it comes
important
to companies,
Exactly, especially if there's few of you. It's a good way to retain people. Retention is important as well because they feel a sense of connectedness and that there are others that they can talk about if they're struggling with something or if, you know, gives opportunities for people to get together.
Right.
You work in a big company, you don't see each other very often, you know, so that's, you know, just one of the ways. Also, you know, as I said, just a normal integrated part of everything that they do.
Right.
Everything that you do. So
embedded.
The ads that you produce should be ads where there's diverse people.
You just said a big one. Representation. What people put out should reflect diversity as well.
Absolutely.
That's a good point.
Their corporate brand needs to reflect diversity. If that's important to you, it should be reflected every and anywhere. It shouldn't be an extra add-on or something separate and apart. It should just be a normal.
Because it's like in the news, we've all seen some of the company and marketing people getting in trouble because they've noticed, well, where's the diversity when it comes to the type of ad, you know? So there have been people who've gotten in trouble over the years for not being represented, you know, representing correctly. So that is a very good point you brought up.
Right. So, you know, if that's what you want your brand message to be, then sure that it reflects diversity.
So where do you see this country going in the next 5 years? Do you see this as going in a positive direction, or what do you think we can do collectively to help put us in a better place?
That's a very tough question.
Yeah.
Under, you know, the leadership that we have, I feel like there is more divisiveness in a variety of different ways. But, you know, we all have to keep on keeping on. And what I always think of is who I am, what I represent, and my circle of influence. So with my circle of influence and the people that I come into contact with, diversity is important to me, and that will always be something that I promote and that I stand for.
Yes.
So I don't know about the whole country,
Right.
but I know that I can do my part.
Right.
Uh,
To make a difference.
To make
right.
a difference,
Mm-hmm.
and I would hope that our country, hopefully the leadership changes to be more inviting or more inclusive. But right now, I do feel like there's a lot of divisiveness, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and just to follow that, it doesn't matter if you are a Democrat, Republican, or Independent. You can embrace diversity and still have different ideologies when it comes to politics. We just want to state that because I have friends who are Republicans, I have friends who are Independent, I have friends who are Democrats, but they all cherish and value diversity. So if we get those who are able to be vocal about supporting and loving each other and speaking of the positivity of embracing different backgrounds, cultures, diversity, I think our voices who are speaking in a positive can be louder than those who are speaking in a negative.
Absolutely.
And, showing our children how good it is to have friends who are different than you, learn from people who are different than you, rather than taking the approach where, oh no, they're different than you, that's bad.
And it's all about humanity when you think about it. It boils down to humanity. We all are human beings. Like you said, it doesn't matter what your politics are, it doesn't matter what race you are, we all bleed the same.
Right.
We all have the same organs.
We have more in common than what we have different.
Exactly. It's okay to celebrate the differences, but we have a lot in common. We all want the same things in life. We want to lead a full life. We want to have our basic needs met. We want to have a home and children and be able to provide for them and care for them. We all really want the same thing.
Yeah.
Good education.
Exactly.
I really feel like it boils down to that. And if people don't see the humanity in it, then there's something else going on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Dr. Monique, it has been wonderful spending this time with you. Do you have any additional thoughts, or what do you think about having this podcast, Food Coma?
Well, I want to thank you so much for the invitation.
You're welcome.
Am excited to be a part, and I think it's a wonderful concept. And I wish you well, and
thank you.
I'm sure it will grow and become something great.
Wonderful.
Greater than it already is.
Yeah, so as I said, our goal is to connect people. So Key Spot mobile app is all about connecting communities. That's the sponsor of Food Coma, Conversations Over Meals in America. We want to embrace diversity, bring people together, and cherish friendships and help others find people outside of their normal circles to become acquainted with. So let's continue to express the goodness when it comes to celebrating diversity.
Absolutely.
So last thing I want to say is we do have our book, Yes You Can, 10 Great Ways to Market Your Business. It's another opportunity for people, small business owners, to explore how you can easily share your business with communities and learn and grow in your talents. So check that book out on Amazon. And again, Key Spot mobile app. Check that out. It's all about connecting community where you can find businesses, services, events, all in one key spot all across the country. So we're going to wrap up this episode of Food Coma, Conversations Over Meals in America. Again, I want to thank Dr. Monique for being here. We'll have her information in the comments if you would like to reach out to her. And again, thank you for listening into our podcast. Please be sure to share with others, and let's continue to connect communities. Thank you.
Find your key to the spot and unlock big savings at Key Spot.